All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We're heading straight down into the crushing darkness of the ocean to explore some of the most terrifying, bizarre, and just flat-out extreme evolutionary adaptations on the planet. As we leave the safety of the shore behind, we're going to look at exactly how extreme environments force life to completely mutate just to survive. But before we actually begin our descent, we really need to wrap our heads around a vital concept: deep-sea gigantism. This is a biological rule that takes familiar, small creatures and turns them into monstrous behemoths the deeper we go. You'll see this pop up a lot on our journey, where the crushing pressure and freezing temperatures literally cause animals to scale up to unbelievable and frankly horrifying proportions. Here is our dive plan for today. We'll be dropping through 5 distinct layers, starting in the sunlight zone, moving down into the twilight zone, hitting the midnight zone, exploring the abyssal plain, and finally reaching the deepest trenches.
Let's start with Section 1, the sunlight zone, horrors in the shallows. We begin in these brightly lit waters, but hey, don't let the familiar surroundings fool you. The evolutionary warfare up here is absolutely ruthless, hiding some of the most diabolical parasitic body snatchers on Earth.
Get this! The tongue-eating louse is the only known parasite to entirely replace a host's organ. It literally crawls in through a fish's gills, kills the tongue, and then becomes the fish's new living tongue so it can feed on its blood. Wild, right? And it is definitely not alone. There's also the parasitic barnacle. It injects its cells into a crab, wraps around its brain to take over its mind, and chemically castrates it. It completely alters the crab's hormones to force it into becoming a zombie babysitter that lovingly grooms the parasite's eggs. Then you have the amazingly named sarcastic fringehead. Most of the time, this guy looks like a totally normal, unassuming fish hiding in a discarded shell. But when he gets territorial, it violently unhinges its massive jaws to wrestle rivals, making its expanded mouth look exactly like the Demogorgon from Stranger Things. They literally mash these massive open mouths together in a horrifying wrestling match to establish dominance. The shallows are just incredibly deceptive. You've got the tiny, stunningly beautiful blue dragon actively hunting the highly venomous Portuguese man-o-war, ripping off its stinging cells to weaponize them inside its own body. Meanwhile, buried in the sand is the bobbit worm. This thing can grow up to 10 feet long and is completely blind. When a fish brushes its antenna, it bursts out of the sand and snaps its scissor-like jaws with enough sheer force to cleanly cut a fish in two before dragging the pieces underground. Moving down to Section 2, the twilight zone, the shadows lengthen. As we sink deeper and the light fades, predators are forced to evolve horrifying, slinging jaws and highly specialized biological weaponry just to survive in the dark. Down here, reality is genuinely scarier than fiction. Take the goblin shark. It senses prey in the dark, and then its entire jaw detaches and slingshots out of its face on elastic ligaments, looking exactly like the inner jaw of the xenomorph from the movie Alien. And then you have the prom bug. It systematically carves out the internal organs of a living gelatinous animal called a selp, completely hollows it out, lays its eggs inside, and then drives the corpse around like a living submarine.
In this murky environment, stealth is everything. The stoplight loosejaw projects a bright red beam of light from beneath its eyes. Since almost no other deep-sea creatures can even see the color red, it acts as an invisible biological sniper laser. The prey never even knows it's being watched. Meanwhile, Sloane's viperfish has teeth so unbelievably massive that if it closed its mouth normally, they would pierce straight through its own brain. Instead, the teeth slide up the outside of its face so it can unhinge its neck and impale victims like a living spear.
As if life wasn't hard enough in the twilight zone, imagine these specialized maggot-like crustaceans. They literally swim through the pitch black just to lock themselves directly into a fish's eye. They root into the tissue, eating it from the inside out. Once the fish is blinded, the parasite just hangs out of the ruined eyeball, dangling its twin egg sacs into the water for the rest of the host's miserable life.
Let's keep sinking to Section 3, the midnight zone, pitch black horrors. In complete freezing darkness with extremely sparse food sources, both reproduction and digestion take on some incredibly grotesque forms.
Finding a mate in this massive, pitch-black void is so difficult that the male deep-sea anglerfish takes a truly drastic approach. When he actually finds a massive female, he bites into her flesh and releases an enzyme that fuses their blood vessels together. Over time, his eyes, fins, and internal organs literally melt away until he basically ceases to exist as an individual. He just becomes a permanent parasitic appendage on her body. To survive the scarce food supply down here, evolution gets highly creative. Siphonophores mutate their shared DNA to form massive, 150-foot collective superorganisms that cast giant glowing nets of death. Down on the seafloor, mouthless zombie worms secrete acid to melt dead whale bones, feeding microscopic harems of males that live inside them. You've also got the black swallower, a tiny fish that unhinges its jaw to swallow prey 10 times its mass, inflating its transparent stomach to absolute extremes. And the pelican eel simply inflates its massive lower jaw like a giant parachute to blindly scoop up anything in its path.
43 feet. That is the unbelievable length of the colossal squid. Living deep in the waters around Antarctica, this apex predator is equipped with dinner plate-sized eyes to see in complete darkness. And, unlike giant squids, its tentacles are lined with swiveling, razor-sharp hooks. When diving sperm whales try to hunt them, these squids fight back violently, leaving massive, ripping circular scars all over the whales' bodies. Dropping further to Section 4, the abyssal plain, crushing pressure and weird gigantism. We are now in an environment defined by crushing pressure, where animals stretch and distort into giant, nearly unrecognizable shapes just to function.
A perfect example of how extreme starvation alters biology is the deep-sea sponge. You're probably familiar with shallow water sponges, right? Harmless filter feeders. But because there's almost nothing to filter down in the abyss, these sponges evolved into terrifying meat eaters. They're covered in microscopic glass hooks to snag drifting crustaceans. Once trapped, the sponge doesn't chew. Instead, its individual cells physically migrate through its own body to surround the trapped animal and dissolve it alive into a liquid soup.
And it gets weirder. Meet the xenophiophores. Thanks to deep-sea gigantism, this is a single-celled amoeba scaled up to the size of a dinner plate. They look like convoluted, spongy brains scattered across the seafloor. They secrete slimy cement to glue their own poop together into armored shells, and they naturally absorb incredible amounts of heavy metals and uranium from the seawater. They are literally radioactive toxic waste dumps.
Next up, the faceless pelagic ribbon worm violently shoots a massive inside-out muscular tube straight from its forehead to stab and inject prey with neurotoxins, then it drinks the liquefied internal organs like a straw. Meanwhile, abyssal gigantism forces sea spiders to grow massive 20-inch leg spans. But because they are basically nothing but legs, they don't even have a body large enough to hold their internal organs. They're forced to keep their reproductive and digestive tracts inside their limbs as they stalk the seafloor.
Finally, Section 5, the deepest trenches, the absolute bottom of the world. We have reached a dead-end abyss of unimaginable pressure, where the standard rules of biology just completely fall apart. Down at 35,000 feet in the Challenger Deep, you'll find swarms of millions of blind, hyper-aggressive crustaceans called Hirondellea gigas. They are so ravenous they will strip falling carcasses to the bone in hours, and if food runs out, they just eat each other alive. Drifting slightly above them is the bizarre Magnapinna squid. It can reach 26 feet long, but almost all of that length is made up of freakish spider-like tentacles. It hovers completely motionless like a living phantom net, just waiting for creatures to blindly collide with its suckers.
Up near the surface, comb jellies are these beautiful swimming spheres. But here, the extreme pressure forces them to abandon swimming entirely. They look like deflated, fleshy balloons anchored to the trench walls. Because they literally cannot chase food in the crushing dark, they deploy incredibly long, hair-thin, sticky tentacles that act like biological tripwires. These lines are covered in microscopic explosives, instantly gluing down any trench shrimp that blindly bumps into them before slowly reeling them in.
Deep in the mud live spoonworms, which look kind of like fat, unsegmented raw sausages. To feed, they shoot out a flat ribbon tongue that stretches up to 10 times their body length, blindly slithering over the mud to lick up rotting debris. But the true nightmare is their reproductive cycle. If a microscopic worm larva happens to land on the female's tongue, the contact chemically mutates it into an eyeless parasitic male. She sweeps him into her mouth, trapping him inside her reproductive tract forever as a microscopic sperm factory. No escape.
One of the deepest living fish ever discovered is the translucent Mariana snailfish, swimming down at an astonishing 27,000 feet. But its adaptation to this environment comes with a pretty horrifying caveat. If you bring this fish up to the surface, the lack of immense oceanic pressure causes its body to completely lose structural integrity,
Within minutes, it literally melts into an unidentifiable puddle of gelatinous goo.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to really think about how extreme environments don't just shape life, they completely redefine it. When survival requires dissolving your own body to mate, casting glowing nets of clones, or relying on 27,000 feet of crushing pressure just to keep your physical form from melting, it forces us to ask, what does normal biology even mean anymore? The deeper we go, the more the lines blur between animal, parasite, and absolute nightmare. Thanks for joining me on this descent.